Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Hello. I'm so glad you can join us on Mission Evolution, the place to find the latest knowledge from today's leading experts. This hour will explore evolving from role to soul. Most of our lives we're identified with what we do. It's no wonder that when faced with major career change or retirement, many of us suffer from a bit of an identity crisis. What if we were to identify with what we are at the soul level rather than what we do? What introspection would be involved in the shift of focus? How would it change our perspective and our world? With us this hour to consider the process of evolving from role to soul is Connie Zweig. Connie is a retired therapist and co-author of Meeting the Shadow and Romancing the Shadow, and the author of the award-winning book, The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul. She's been doing contemplative practices for more than 50 years. Her website, conniezweig.com. Connie, thanks for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Hi, Gwilda. Good to be with you.
It's nice to be with you as well. So let's just dig right in. What are the pitfalls of identifying with role rather than soul?
Well, most of us live in this workaholic culture that focuses on productivity and success and achievement. And we learn from very young age that this is what's important, that what we do essentially is who we are. What do you want to be when you grow up? Means what job or career do you want? We go to a party, the first thing someone asks is, what do you do? So there's a lot of messaging that through the lifespan continues to transmit to us that what we do is essential to who we are. And then as we begin to move past midlife, and I would say, midlife is the peak of our doing. It's the empire building. We want to build financial security for a family or for ourselves. We want to contribute to the world in some particular way. And so as we grow older past that stage, some people begin to have fantasies of retirement or of slowing down or of more leisure time or of travel. What then happens to that identity of the doer? So I noticed for myself, I worked as a psychologist for 30 years. And as I moved into my late 60s, I began to say to myself, if I retire, who is Dr. Connie? Who is the shadow expert? Who am I if I'm not those things? Who am I if I'm not a writer? And that who am I question sometimes occurs to us at midlife or in adolescence when kids have identity crises. With the midlife crises, but it returns again. And nobody has really talked about the late life identity crisis. So that's what this is pointing toward.
Well, I'd like to start with, I just had an experience not too long ago. A young lady came to visit me. She's her mother's a friend of mine, and she was going through, and she's on her way to spend a little time in Mexico before she has to decide what she's going to do, what she's going to be. And the poor little gal was under a lot of stress. Because we're taught that when we're getting ready to go to college, we have to decide what we're going to do for the rest of our lives, what we're going to be for the rest of our lives. And none of the options was fitting for her. And I could tell that she was really stressed about it. And I just reframed it for her saying, well, what's your next step needs to be what's looked at, because you can't choose now what you're going to be forever. So it starts young, doesn't it?
It starts very young. I can already see it in my grandkids. I can already see the kids with a scientific bent are already being told that they're going to become scientists. And if they have an artistic bent, they're already told they're going to do that. So this question, who am I, is more than a psychological question. It's a spiritual question.
Mhm.
And in India, there's a teacher named Ramana Maharshi, a renowned teacher from South India. He's no longer here. But his entire lineage teaches contemplating the question, who am I?
Hmm.
And that's the only practice that they engage. So when that question returned for me again, I began to ask myself, I've been a big doer. Who am I if I'm not the doer? And I began to explore that with clients who were in midlife and beyond. And they came up with different names for it. One was the driver, one was the perfectionist, one was the dominator. So these parts of us that really can bring us a lot of success and a satisfying, meaningful life, and even a lot of contribution to the common good, at some point, they begin to change as we begin to change direction and become an elder. And the doing begins to take a different position in the context of our lives. So if I'm no longer the doer, then who am I? And in religious and spiritual traditions, we're not the doer. That's not the teaching. The teaching is I'm spirit, I'm divine, I'm essence, I'm Buddha nature, I'm Christ nature, I'm the higher power. So, whatever your tradition or language you have for this isn't important to me. What's important is that you find some practices to begin to move your identity from what you do to who you really are.
I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things that I see glaringly missing in our culture that's present in almost all of your more indigenous cultures and certainly some of the religious cultures is the rites of passage. So that there's kind of permission and oftentimes ceremony when you pass from one stage to the other. And you're viewed as expressing your soul through these different stages versus identifying with any one of them and getting stuck there. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, there's communion, there's bar mitzvah, there are these rites of passage in earlier stages of life. But to move from senior to elder, our culture does not have a rite of passage.
Yeah, it's just
Native,
glaringly absent, you know, and other
some,
cultures do.
yeah, so Native American cultures have that built in. There are certain rituals that begin to happen because there's a reference for elders, a reverence, a respect, a
And a place for
nobility,
and a place
and,
for them to participate.
and a place for them to have a voice and contribute their wisdom.
Mhm.
And so, because that's so missing in the dominant mainstream culture, I realized that I wanted to write the inner work of age so that it was like a rite of passage. So that as you walk through the themes and the practices that are in every chapter, you begin to make this internal shift. You do the inner work that's needed to become an elder. And by the end, you stand inside yourself in a different position, no longer the doer, no longer the victim, no longer the, I call the inner ageist, the part of us that is ashamed of growing old and watching our bodies change. All these internal parts of us that give us different messages that lead to suffering. Maybe it's regret about the past or bitterness towards somebody, an unwillingness to forgive someone. All of these things block us from moving into elderhood.
Well, how about just the advertising and the what's pr- uh, presented to us as what's acceptable and beautiful and worthwhile? It's not over about 30 years old.
That's right.
And so life stops at 30, and it seems like so many, particularly women, spend so much time trying to stay looking 30 that they aren't developing their inner landscape at all.
So, you know, the releasing of image, the releasing of identification with beauty, seductiveness, and self image is a really important part of the transition for women. Shame about wrinkles, shame about body image, all of that stuff is perpetuated by collective ageism. And so some of it is the messaging we get into TV commercials, print advertisements. We should have surgery, we should take hormones, all of this stuff. But some of it is more subtle than that. So I can remember in my own childhood, my dad making negative comments about older women on television. I can remember his contempt. And I can remember some of the TV shows, like say All in the Family, where Archie Bunker treated his wife with contempt, partly because of her age. These messages get internalized by kids. And then what happens is, and even in my family, my grandmother was treated with disrespect. So what happens is we develop what I call an inner ageist, a part of us that internalizes that ageism from the culture and targets ourselves. We become the target of it. I'm bad because I'm not staying young and I'm growing older. I'm bad because I'm looking older. I'm bad because I want to slow down and be less productive. I'm bad because I'm feeling dependent now on others. And all of these messages come from the ageism in the culture, the ageism in our families, the ageism in our relationships.
And isn't it just about impossible to push through that and express and be creative within the beauty of the era that we're in, of the age or the shawl that we're wearing? If everything is clouded, including our internal messaging, with "I'm worthless because I'm an old woman," or "I'm worthless because I'm no longer a productive husband. I'm no longer earning the money I could have. I'm no longer doing. I don't have a role in the world."
Yes. So one of my clients said to me, "Who am I if I'm not the provider?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's exactly what you're saying. So this is the inner work of age. And there are practices and tools for working through these issues. My expertise is the shadow, the personal unconscious.
And
And
that's a needed area of study, I'll tell you.
and most of this happens in the shadow, not in our conscious awareness. Unless people are really attuned to themselves, to their inner dialogue, or to their feelings, and they know that they're shaming themselves or criticizing themselves. If not, that stuff all happens just beneath the threshold of awareness in the shadow. And so the book is really about how do you learn to detect what's going on in those deeper parts of yourself and how that's affecting you. There's research out of Yale University now. A psychologist spent decades, her career really, studying the impact of this internalized ageism that we're speaking of. And she found that it has effects on emotional health, on cognitive health and memory, on cardiac health, and even on longevity. So, because of the whole body mind interaction, this is not just in your head. This is a
Well,
whole complex, interconnected system when you internalize ageism that has many outcomes.
we're going to have to get deeper into that topic because it's a very important one on the other side of a station break. Connie and I will return very shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Hello again. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us this hour discussing moving out of role and into soul is Connie Zweig. Her website, conniezweig.com. Connie, we were talking about the impact of these hidden messages that we've been conditioned into by our upbringing, by media, but aren't necessarily conscious of applying them to ourselves and others. And you were talking about the health effect. Would you go on with that?
Yeah, so the inner ageist, the part of us that has internalized ageism in our from our families or from the media or from the church or from education, um, we carry that part of us through the lifespan. And as we age, we're giving ourselves the message that it's not good. Young is good, old is bad. It turns out from this research at Yale that I mentioned, that is affecting the body mind in many ways. It's actually reducing our longevity by 7 years. It's
Whoa,
affecting our
7 years.
it's affecting our memories. It's affecting our heart health, our emotional health. Because you can't have what I call a shadow character, a part of you that's unconscious, that's not affecting all of you. Everything is interconnected, and the body and mind are functionally identical. So it's all affecting everything. We just haven't ever been able to track all that in our science yet.
It's
So
it's amazing, isn't it, how much it affects us? Because it's like I catch myself sounding just exactly like my mother did at my age, you know. So how much is totally imprinted, or is it genetically predisposed to because it's been passed down the generation so long to identify with age in a negative way?
well, I don't know if it's genetic, but I do know that it can be intergenerational. So I can see in my own family from my maternal grandmother and the messaging to my mother, to me and my sister. And I can kind of see the thread of that through those three generations. Um, I can't see the other way. I didn't know my father's parents, but I can certainly see the messaging from him to me. And in the same way that, we inherit blue eyes or brown hair, we inherit these unconscious messages. There are a lot of teachers now who talk about intergenerational trauma. So sexual abuse that's transmitted through the generations, or the Holocaust,
Yeah,
or
the Holocaust is a
racism,
big one, isn't it?
or racism, the experience of descendants of slaves through the generations. And so these traumatic emotional issues can be handed down. We don't know if they're genetic, but we call this epigenetic.
Right. Hmm.
So in the case of ageism and the way that it's internalized, it's really important, I think, to begin to become conscious of how this is affecting you as you grow older, which is something we all have in common. Everybody on this planet is growing older every day. It's not something we can change or reverse, even though there are people who are trying to.
So, Connie, how old do you think that this prejudice against aging? How long has it been around with us? Because I know it's not
I
always been the
don't,
way. There was
I
respect for
don't,
the elders.
well, there was respect for elders, as we said, in native cultures, but I don't know in mainstream white culture. I really don't know how many generations it's been here. I would certainly say that so much of our country is immigrants. And so if those immigrants, let's say our great grandparents, were in different cultures, they may have had a different experience, let's say in Eastern Europe or wherever they were. They may have had a different experience then. But certainly in the West, this is the case now, and it's constantly being reinforced in the media. There's some exceptions to this. There's an anti-ageism movement that's starting now. Um, the UN has recognized it. Some media outlets have recognized it. I am noticing more and more models in their 70s and 80s.
Yes, I am too.
And so there's a little crack in the wall.
Well, do you think the baby boomers have something to do with that, in that there's so many more of the people that are coming of age, um, and aging, that marketing is kind of turning that direction as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of marketing to boomers, I think, from both sides. The messaging to stay young and the messaging to be authentic and become an elder. And I think that there's, that's my generation. And I'm noticing now that both are going on.
Yeah, it's enough to give you an identity crisis, isn't it?
Well, when I began this research about 6 years ago, um, I noticed in myself that I was feeling anxious in my late 60s about what was next. As you would say, what's my next step? And I was looking at retirement and noticing a lot of fear coming up because of the doer, but also because of the inner ageist, right? They're kind of working together in us. Um, I found no books, not a single book that looked at the unconscious impact on age. Lots of other books about socioeconomic and demographic issues and stats and all that, and some psychology, but no depth psychology, which is about the unconscious. So I started to realize that I needed to write about it.
So
And I
let's talk a little bit about the shadow that you're expressing, because it is your expertise. Um, how do we know that our life is being driven by our shadow versus our consciousness?
Well, I wouldn't say our life is being driven by it. It's influencing, your shadow's influencing you. If you notice this, Gwilda, if you notice that you have a conscious intention to move in one direction, and then something inside of you comes up and sabotages it perpendicular to the direction you're going. So let's say you promise yourself you're going to be sober and then you act out. Or you promise yourself you're not going to criticize your husband and then you act out. Or you promise yourself you're going to meditate every day and then you don't. So that is the shadow erupting that is interfering with the conscious mind and the conscious intentions or plans or agendas that the ego has, the ego's agenda. And so the ego and the shadow are in tension with each other. And that's because when we're growing up, they form in relation to each other. So when you're a child, if you're told it's good to be polite and kind and generous, those qualities go into your ego, your conscious personality. And their opposites go into the shadow: impolite, unkind, stingy, angry, crying. Whatever's forbidden or shamed or punished goes into the shadow. So when we're older, what starts to happen as we age is some of that material starts to erupt and cause us to act out, right? So
Right.
people
So,
would come to
let me
me.
let me see if I get this right. So, by being told this is what's good and this is what's bad, we polarize against the bad and towards the good, and there's a big gap in the middle where balance might be found. And so, we're either living out of prescribed behaviors that are good, and in the meantime, this shadow is building pressure. Are we together here on this?
Yes, there's charge building in the unconscious. I don't look at gap with balance. That's not part of my model. But yes, we're expressing or we're repressing. So we might have permission to express our anger, or we might be repressing our anger, and then it comes out indirectly. You can't repress anger forever. There are some circumstances in which anger needs to be expressed, like moral outrage about injustice, or you're being abused, right? You need to be angry. But if that anger is forbidden during all your formative years, it's built charge in your unconscious. And so then you can become a rageaholic. You can become someone who just can't manage his anger, can't control it from time to time. It just erupts. Same thing with sadness or grief or sorrow. And then you become depressed because there has been no outlet for that sadness for so many years.
Well, it sounds to me like this situation that you've described so beautifully um, sets up inauthenticity. So we're behaving by a particular prescription that's judged good, but that excludes the natural and needed expression of some things that start to build in the shadow. So we aren't being authentic in either place, right? We're out of balance in the shadow, and we're cutting part of our arm off, basically, a part of our expression off to conform to what we see as the consciousness.
Well, this is what some people call the false self. So we develop a false self or a persona in order to receive love and approval and avoid punishment. So the process is inevitable. This is not something that parents can, stop doing because their own shadows are triggered when their kids cry or hit another kid or steal something. Their own shadows are triggered, right?
Right. And so then they do the same thing their parents did, and there you have it being passed down.
That's right.
Hmm.
So as we grow older, let's say in the midlife crisis, I used to see people in my practice who would just blow up their lives. They'd leave their marriage, they'd leave their career, they'd walk away because all the material in the shadow was erupting and they thought they had to act it out because they didn't have the tools to really work with it consciously. And then in
And
later life, sorry.
how much is also, as you're coming into midlife crisis, which is an interesting topic, you've lived by the rules and it doesn't look like you want it to. And so then people go the other direction. Is that kind of what's going on as well?
Yeah, I mean, people have said to me, I've obeyed the rules all my life.
Hmm.
I don't care anymore. F it. I'm done. I didn't get what I wanted anyway, and look what I sacrificed.
Hmm.
And they start to see the sacrifices, right? I wanted to be an artist, but I became a businessman. I'm not going to do it anymore, right?
Hmm.
So in nobody had ever really looked at this process in the later years, like 55 and above. How does the material in the shadow begin to emerge and sabotage our lives as we're moving toward life completion?
Well, does it stand between us and being able to express our soul from any shawl, from any age, from any era of our life?
Yes. I mean, I think that it sabotages our authenticity and our self expression. It leaves us with a narrower range of feeling and self expression. And I've met so many people in their 60s and 70s and 80s, even, who now say, I'm going to do what I always wanted to do. My literary agent closed her business and she's painting full time. And I've heard versions of that story over and over again. So, role to soul for me has a little bit different meaning than changing what we do. So that phrase I borrowed from the spiritual teacher Ram Dass. He coined that phrase.
Hmm.
And for him, it was about an internal shift in awareness from role, what I do, to soul, who I really am.
Well, Connie, we're going to have to start picking up on from role to soul on the other side of a break. Connie and I will be right back to continue this fascinating discussion. So you stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Hi there. This is
Hi.
Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Our guest this hour is Connie Zweig. Her website, conniezweig.com. Connie, we were just getting into the nuts and bolts of moving from role to soul. And it would appear to me that this could be something that could ease our way regardless of our age if we identify more with what we are and move that through what we're doing. So how do we achieve that?
So even the word achieve is tricky, right? Right? We don't even have the language. We don't have the non-doing language to shift our awareness. And so this shift in consciousness is framed as more doing, and it's very tricky. So one of the simple practices I give to people is when you meditate or sit in prayer or contemplation, to practice saying to yourself, I am not the doer or the provider or the driver or the mother. I am not the teacher or the therapist or the lawyer or the salesman or the doctor. I am spirit, fill in the blank. I am soul. I am higher self. I am Buddha nature or Christ nature. And begin to repeat that on a regular basis until it sinks into your body, until you feel you can embody it. I am not, so for me, I am not the doer. I am pure awareness. That's my language. I am pure awareness. I am pure awareness. And to practice that over time. And what happens at first is a lot of resistance comes up. And it comes from the shadow, right? It's a part of your shadow saying to yourself, this is crazy. Like, what? What are you talking about? Of course, I get everything done. I'm an achiever.
Isn't there a lot of
Or,
investment in that? Because, we've been sold this bill of goods all along that we're only as good as what we do.
yeah.
Hmm.
So that investment is defended by that part of ourself that's identified with it. And so this contemplation sounds simple, but it's actually quite complex, because as the resistance comes up, you begin to uncover the parts of yourself that are invested, that are identified with the doer.
Hmm.
And if you know how to meditate, you can identify those as thoughts and let them go. If you know how to do shadow work, you can explore them and see where they come from and why they're coming up. And you sink deeper and deeper into, I'm not the doer, I am whatever it is. I am consciousness, I am spirit, I am Christ nature. And you allow it to kind of enter your cells. And you carry that then into your activity. So I'm not making a split between doing and being. Or some people say to me, I don't want to be a couch potato. This is not about sitting around and doing nothing. This is about doing whatever it is you do. Let's say grandparenting or writing or photography or travel, whatever it is you do, volunteering, with the awareness of role to soul, the awareness that whatever you're doing is not who you are. Who you are is a little bit of the divine in action.
So bringing that divine through whatever role is present at whatever age, isn't that the goal ultimately? And there's that word goal. It sounds like doing again, right?
Well, I don't see this as age appropriate for younger ages. Everyone I know who had spiritual breakthroughs at early ages got in trouble. Um, Ken Wilber and John Wellwood write about spiritual bypass. This is a way of talking about transcendence before ego development. So for me, each stage of life has a purpose. Childhood, adolescence, and midlife are about ego building, ego consolidation. The ego's not the enemy. We need that to move around in the world. It's only later, and if you look at the traditional cultures, you'll see that spiritual practice comes later in life. In India, there are 4 stages of life: the student, the householder, the grandparent or forest dweller, and then sannyasa, the time for letting go of our attachments and really focusing on spiritual practice. So for me, that's kind of age appropriate. There are people who can begin this work at midlife and not have a problem, you know, but there are other people who get in trouble by doing this too early.
So I think the point I was trying to make is how can we alleviate the suffering that this identifying with role is causing our children, because it's putting a lot of pressure on them to choose what they're going to be versus bringing what they are into what they choose to do.
So in terms of parenting, I would suggest to people that you be aware how your messaging, your gestures are creating shadow material. Begin to notice how the kids respond to what you're saying and how you're saying it, your tone of voice, your body language. How are they responding? Do they look diminished? Do they look like their little light gets smaller? Or do they look enlarged, like they get it, like they hear you, like they take it in? And as you begin to practice that as a parent, your relationship with your child will change. There can be a deeper exchange. And some of it is nonverbal, some of it is modeling. So if you model, meditation every day, they're going to get the message that that's important. Other kinds of self-care, like good sleep, good exercise, good food, they're going to get the message that that's important. If for other people who focus on what are you going to do when you grow up and, make your decisions now when you're in adolescence and commit to it for the rest of your life and all that, I suggest countering that message with, I love you as you are. I accept you as you are. I see you for who you are, not for what you do. And you can say that to a kid at any age, really, from toddlers through adolescence, through young adulthood. I see who you are. I love who you are. You're a precious being. You are not your accomplishments. And you can say that and allow it to see if it penetrates your child.
It's got a lot to penetrate through, excuse me, because of all the conditioning from school.
That's right.
Excuse me.
That's right. But you can say that when the kid's older. You can say, at school, they're giving you a lot of tasks and they're grading you and they're creating competition and they're preparing you for college. And that's their job. Okay? That's their job. My job is to let you know how lovable you are and how worthy you are, just as you are.
So let's change gears a little bit. You talk about life review. What is it and what's its purpose?
So this is a practice. Traditional life review is a practice that came about because Robert Butler, a gerontologist, noticed, I think it was in the 50s, it was either in the 50s or 60s, that most older adults reminisced a lot about the past and expressed nostalgia about the past. And that was being pathologized. That's a word from psychology that means it was being looked at as a problem. Oh, they must be senile because they're stuck in the past. And he said, no, they're trying to digest something. They're going through their memories because they're trying to integrate them and distill lessons from them, that it was an intentional process. So he designed life review to structure that process for people. However, he didn't include the shadow, right?
Rats.
So, well, nobody does. except in the Jungian world where it's discussed. So I designed life review for as one of the practices in the inner work of age to walk people through their lived life, their conscious lives, the ego's journey, and then to look at the unlived life in the shadow. What was unlived? What's the story that was unlived beneath the boundary of awareness? And how can you connect it to your lived life? So if you became a parent at a young age, what went into the shadow?
So basically, what did we have to set aside to do what we did?
That's right.
Okay.
What was expressed and what was unexpressed or repressed. And so I have people doing that by decades throughout the lifespan. And they're finding, patterns and synchronicities and mentors they had forgotten about. And it's been really magical. People are just loving that. So that is one of the tools to move from senior to elder. Because when you can kind of land where you are now, having integrated all the material from your life and distilled the wisdom from it, you can begin to become an elder.
Would you define elder? We haven't done that yet. The difference
Yeah.
between old and elder.
Yeah. So what I mean by that is not chronological. We get our Medicare card at 65, but we become a senior, not an elder. And you might have known people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who are closed-minded, rigid, regretful, bitter. That's not an elder, from my point of view. I'm talking about people who have explored their wounds, who have explored their histories, who have given and received forgiveness, who have done emotional repair work with themselves and their families, who have questioned their own spiritual beliefs and re-examined them, re-examined their practices and their teachers, done a life review. And so there's a whole series of steps in the book about how to become an elder and do this inner work. And so for me, it's a little bit like the vision quest that you do in a native culture to become an elder. An elder is a stage, not an age.
And it's
So
one that a lot of people just bypass because they haven't been able to do the work, or it hasn't occurred to them, it's not given to them to do the work to make that transition.
that's right. We don't have the opportunity. We don't have the context, the knowledge, the rite of passage. It's just not there.
I love, and we're just about out of time in this segment, but when we come back, I'd really like to go into what is the difference? How much I can see how much difference this must make, because if we're stuck with regret, if our shadow is still unconscious and operating in our lives, if all of these places that we've set ourselves aside to do our role um, are not integrated, we just kind of lock down around ourselves and freeze, don't we?
That's right. There's a big contraction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're confusing with aging, really, is this contraction that
Yes,
isn't really necessary.
that's exactly right. And it's viewed as a decline,
Yeah.
which is
Well,
not
I'd love to
inevitable.
get into that more on the other side, but it is time for a commercial break. Please stay with us. Connie and I will continue to explore the
Thank you.
evolutionary aging. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Welcome back. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. This hour, our expert guest is Connie Zweig. Her website, conniezweig.com. Connie, we were just about to get into how all the signs that we've come to associate with aging, or at least a lot of them, this slowing down, getting stiff, crumpling over, losing flexibility in body and mind, actually have to do with the lack of processing rather than the aging process. Would you continue with that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I wouldn't say it's that black and white, Gwilda, because people do experience illness and physical limitations. We all do as we age. But the emotional material that is not processed, like the inner aegis we were talking about earlier, does have an effect on our health and on our bodies and on our energy level, on our posture, on our eventually on illness, right? So there's this connection between our emotional resilience and our physical resilience. In the past, we viewed aging as inevitable decline. And it was typically seen as a slow decline, 50 and you're downhill from there, right? Now we know there are people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s who are vital. Some are athletic. Some are contributing great things. For example, Elders Action Network is a fabulous community of people engaged in social justice work. ThirdAct.org is about elders, they call us experienced Americans, fighting for democracy and fighting the climate crisis. There are all kinds of elders engaged in activism for the common good, as well as healthy lifestyles, as well as contemplative practices. So we're starting to get a different picture of what's possible in these years. And some of it is because people have greater health. A lot of people have financial resources. Some people don't. And so we're getting this picture that rather than a slow decline, aging looks more like a horizontal line and then you die. And so there's more sudden death. We don't want to look at this as without mortality awareness, because there is a point at which each of us will die, our bodies will die. And part of becoming an elder is that awareness that we will die, that our lives will end. And that can have an alchemical impact in how we live our lives now. It can allow us to be more present, to be more aware of what we want to contribute now, to be more aware of our priorities and our values, some of the practices that are in the book, because of mortality awareness, because we're holding that, we're not in denial of death, as so many people have been.
And it's like if you are in full awareness that this is a finite experience here, okay? And rather than just kind of put that into denial, if we live our lives like each day was our last and like we had forever to live at the same time, we can contribute much more than if we're in total denial of our mortality or dreading it every day of our life.
That's right.
Yeah. So how do you find that balance? What is the process of what you offer here? What's the process of finding that acceptance without getting morbid about it and allowing ourselves to blossom and bloom up until that day?
Well, I write in the book about 3 portals to becoming an elder. So one of them is mortality awareness and letting that penetrate so that we really carry it with us. Another is shadow awareness, so that we begin to open to the deeper psyche, our inner worlds that we haven't been aware of. The other one is pure awareness or consciousness or soul, whatever we call that divine part of us through spiritual practice. And as we begin to more consciously explore those 3 portals, we move toward becoming an elder. We move toward a conscious process of life completion. And what does life completion look like for each of us might be really different. Might be very different for me than for you. For someone who has regret about how they treated someone, life completion includes, how do you process that? is there room to give and receive forgiveness and talk about that? Or for someone who feels unfulfilled in the work that they've done, how do you deal with that as you move toward life completion? Or hasn't given enough to the common good? How do you, in the context of life completion, how do you work with that? And so it means different things to different people. And I think that the question of what do you need to say or do or feel so that you don't die with regret is a really pertinent question for elders. To contemplate that question, to put it in your words, what's my next step so that I don't die with regret? And that part of life completion is really essential, and it brings people great peace.
Do you think that we have an opportunity now to mirror a different way of aging for those that are to follow than what we've seen ourselves?
Oh, yeah, I think that's already happening. Absolutely. Baby boomers did everything differently. So
Yeah, we did.
now, right? So now we're doing old age differently. And if you're living with eyes wide open, you can see that. You can see it in the media. You can see it in the women and the people of color in more positions of influence in our generation. And that is modeling aging in a different way, right? You can see it in families. Let's say my 10-year-old grandson is just amazed that I'm 73 and I published another book. And we talk about what that means to be in your 70s and to be writing and to be teaching. So he's having a very different experience of grandma than I had. My grandmother didn't model much really good stuff for me. It was a very
E
negative image of age.
exactly, and that's, I think, what a lot of us grew up with is watching people deteriorate, and it's not really necessary, is it?
And get depressed
Mhm, mhm,
and
fatalistic and all that. Mhm.
yeah, yeah,
Right, right.
yeah.
So, Connie, it's time in the program when I need to ask you, what is your mission?
What is my mission?
Mhm.
Um, so when I did my life review and I looked at my 4 different careers, which I thought were distinct, what I found through that practice is that they all had the same mission, and I call it my soul's mission. It's the transmission of information about consciousness.
Mm, mhm.
And that has carried through when I was a meditation teacher, when I was a psychologist. I wrote Meeting the Shadow, Romancing the Shadow. I wrote a novel about the life of the Sufi poet Rumi, which is all about the evolution of his consciousness. I wrote The Inner Work of Age, which is about consciousness in later life. Working as a psychologist, I used to teach all my clients how to meditate as well as do shadow work. So with the life review, I saw this thread in the tapestry of my life. It kind of pulled everything together as my mission.
Very beautiful, because can't we all do that? Can't we all we come, like we started this conversation, we come with a purpose, right? How fully we live that purpose is dependent on how introspective we can be. But once you become introspective, then can you find that thread?
Well, I think, each person has a different, um, I've spoken to many people who feel like they haven't found their purpose or their mission. Um, they might have felt purposeful for a while as a parent or in a job or in a relationship, but they don't necessarily see that lifelong thread that ties everything together.
Isn't it
And
helpful to see that?
it's very profound.
Hmm.
It's a profound experience to see it. And that's why I recommend doing the life review the way that it's done in the book. But
It,
I also
it,
don't know if everybody really has that experience. I don't know if it's there to be found for everyone. Um, I don't know that it's universal. You know, my life was very privileged. I'm very aware of how privileged it's been, even despite being a woman, which had its own challenges. But when I see my life review, I see how opportunities opened, how mentors showed up again and again, how doors opened. Um, I had so many chances to give my gifts. There are many people who don't experience life that way. So I don't want to make it a should. I don't want to make it a should that people have to see their lives that way.
right. But it feels to me like the gifts are so worth the effort,
Yeah, it's true.
right? So worth the effort.
Yeah.
So, what can we offer from a place of soul identity that we simply cannot from a place of role identity?
Um, so my experience of teaching from the inner work of age in my 70s versus my experience of teaching romancing the shadow in my 40s is totally different. Um, the writing experience was different. This book was downloaded. I mean, my ego, it didn't come from my mind, the inner work of age. It was not an intellectual exercise. It came through. And the teaching has been a similar experience. It's been kind of spontaneous, intuitive transmission from my soul, partly because I see other people as souls, right? It's not just I'm identified with that in myself, but I perceive everybody as a soul on a journey. I wasn't like that in my 40s. My ego was running the show. I wanted success and numbers and, all this other stuff. None of that matters today in my 70s. What matters is, to me, um, is that my work reaches people who need it, that the right readers find it, and that it's meaningful to them. And, with the gift of Zoom, I've been able to meet so many of my readers and hear from them. And that's just been really gratifying. So, living and working as a soul is a different quality of life. Because it's a different quality of awareness, it's a different quality of life.
Well, I'm afraid we are out of time. It's just flown, and I can't thank you enough for being on the show. Our guest this hour has been Connie Zweig, author of the award winning book, The Inner Work of Age Shifting from Role to Soul. Her website, conniezweig.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. Please be sure to join us right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to our rapidly evolving world.